of a predisposition playing God. Oh nah, here we go. America the brave still fears what we don't know. God loves all his children, it's somehow forgotten, but we paraphrase a book written 3,500 years ago. I don't know.
And I can't change, even if I tried, even if I wanted to. And I can't.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Manitoba School Boards Association webinar on education governance for public schools in Manitoba. As usual, on the left side you'll see the lower window for questions, so feel free to type any question throughout the webinar at any time and I'll answer them verbally at the end. Other participants will not see your questions or who is submitting the questions, so you may want to note that if the session is being recorded. So if you are listening to this as a recording, then obviously you won't be able to post any questions, but you can certainly contact me directly after you've run through it. As well, whether you're listening live here today or listening to the recording without your whole board, and if you'd like a more individualized session in person or online, you can contact me to make arrangements for that as well. Today we'll be looking at the basics of how school boards in Manitoba govern, or more simply, who does what. It's a broad oversight of the legal and regulatory framework for public education, or Education Governance 101. You might just be starting out as a trustee, or maybe you aren't even there yet and you're just considering running as a trustee. In any case, I hope that you'll find this background useful. I'll be coming at it from two directions. It's something to give us guidance, and we are bound by certain rules and regulations. That's education governance, and these were created with the aim of providing a base for student achievement. It's also something to be used for the purposes of the school board. It's a framework, if you like, or a tool for a program within your division and community, and takes into account the differing cultures and priorities within those communities. It's purposely giving a lot of leeway so divisions may adapt to their own individual needs. So we'll just move into the main part of the presentation from here. Today we want to consider the governance structure within the education system. Manitoba's public education system is made up of many parts all working in tandem. Governance is an integral part that pulls all areas together to, we hope, achieve the pinnacle of high student achievement. The school board is the proprietor, not the owner. It is actually public ownership. You can see here that it's the public that makes up the base, with the trustees acting as interim managers. Therefore, there's also an expectation that the public has a say, and trustees need to take into account all perspectives when making decisions. As you can see, even above the base level, there are a lot more partnerships that will expect to have a say in the work of school boards. They not only have a say, but it's the government that creates the laws that trump school board policy, and trustees have to work within those confines. School boards receive direction from the Public Schools Act, or PSA, and the Education Administration Act. And there are others which I'll go into in a moment, but there are influences all around. If the school board's role is to be there and interpret, then they govern based on the parameters of these acts. If you take a look at this diagram, all bodies noted here are connected and assist in providing the school board with a financial structure, the structure within which to operate, credibility, guidance, the authority to move forward, and of course purpose. There are at times a perception that school boards are a bit shadowy and do what they want and don't have to answer to anyone, but they are created by provincial statute and bound by law. However, we don't have a constitutional right to have school boards. Ministers of Education have actually dismissed entire school boards, and they decide on the school board's authority. Some provinces, for example, Prince Edward Island and New Brunswick, they don't even have school boards. So school boards serve at the government's or the public's will. There are also some misinterpretations on the power of the school board. Some areas within the laws that impact the school system are governed by federal and provincial law. And in these areas, school boards don't have the authority to act of their own accord. The previous slide showed links that a school board depends upon and is governed by. And the 2-volume Special Schools set includes the 2 principal legal acts. As indicated earlier, there are others, however, that play a part, and as a whole, these statutes govern the conduct of school boards and the public education system. Some of these include the Public Schools Finance Board Act, which administers the capital and operational support programs. In other words, it governs the monies paid out to the school divisions. It also provides for consultations with school divisions and governs the conflict of interest guidelines. Then there's the Teachers' Pensions Act. This sets out definitions and formulas that govern teachers' pensions. The Municipal Councils and School Boards Elections Act governs rules for trustee elections, voter eligibility, terms, nominations, ballots, and all other areas pertaining to the election of trustees. There's even something, the Non-Smokers Health Protection Act. As schools are deemed public places, this act governs school property as well. There's the Student Aid Act. It governs student aid consisting of the Manitoba bursary, student loans, and any other awards set out by the Act's regulations. School boards are bound by multiple legislation and are not free to do what they want. Federal law trumps provincial law, which trumps both municipal and school division bylaws. There are also employment-related acts such as the Labor Relations Act, Employment Standards Code, Workplace Health and Safety Act, and then there are sundry miscellaneous pieces of legislation to consider, everything from the Human Rights Code to FIPA, PHIA, Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, which is federal, as are the Youth Criminal Justice Act and Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So the point here is that before a trustee can consider whether to implement policy or perhaps tweak some legislation that the government has put into place, the decision to do so may not actually be theirs. So as noted, there are the 2 acts that have the most broad impact on school divisions, and they're the Public Schools Act and the Education Administration Act. At the Manitoba School Boards Association, we're in contact with the government and we watch and advise on new legislation. If it's passed, then we look to advise school boards. School boards do have some discretion at the board level on the legislation as it indicates in places that school boards may go further within their own policies. But the key things to remember that these acts govern school operations. They are legally binding upon the public school boards, and they outline the authority for the Minister of Education to make regulations. The acts lay out the broad interpretations, but it's the regulations that lay out the specifics. And it's the regulations that can be changed from time to time by the governing party. A change to the regulations does not require public input nor debate in the legislature. This is an area we watch closely, and the association may submit, perhaps from time to time, a brief or a presentation to the minister for their consideration when they're thinking about making changes to the regulations. And then if changes are made, they are relayed to the association, or from the association to our division members. For example, there's the Law Amendments Review Committee Act. It had the right, in there it states that it has the right for an appropriate education, but it's the regulations that hold the specifics on that. So I noted some acts earlier that influenced the school system, but again there are others, both federal and provincial, that influence further the sphere in which schools operate. School policies and practices must comply with the laws of all higher levels of government, federal or provincial. legislation may not deal with education specifically, but which has an impact on school board operations. And these are some examples here. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Youth Criminal Justice Act, and the Workplace Safety and Health Act, which I mentioned earlier, the Labor Relations Act, the Employment Standards Code, Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, or FIPA, and the Personal Health Information Act and the Human Rights Code. So these are, as I said, federal, provincial, and then there's municipal or school. And you need to be mindful of the order when you're thinking about policy development. Manitoba is the only province where school boards retain local taxing authority. Local education tax levies are set by the school board, and municipalities are responsible for collection and transfer of the monies to school divisions. The province also levies a provincial education property tax, and these funds are redistributed by the province to school divisions through the Provincial Funding of Schools program. You may hear the acronym FRAME, or F-R-A-M-E. This is the financial reporting framework for all public school divisions. Here's a quick reference that you may find puts the magnitude of the education system into scope. In 2012-13, the total operating expenditures for Manitoba Public Schools was $2.03 billion. And that is, if you're looking at how that is split, it's often a ratio of 2/3 coming from provincial funding and 1/3 from the local school board levy. And then there's a small percentage from sources such as international student fees or special grants or other areas. And the local school board levy may, it'll vary between the different school divisions. School boards often face the criticism that they have no training and that trustees do not have the expertise of professional educators. A similar situation exists, however, for all levels of elected officials, municipal councillors, MLAs, and MPs. The intent of our democratic electoral processes is to ensure that lay people from the community bring their diverse voices to the public, to the decision-making process. Professional staff provide the field and technical expertise required to give life to and take action on the decisions of the policymakers. School boards often face the criticism that they have School boards make decisions that affect everyone in the province, either directly or indirectly. They are the community voice. They communicate with the public. One key to remember is that school boards are a major employer in the province with over 30,000 employees between teachers and support staff. They matter because they make decisions that affect everyone. They represent everyone, and they help build our communities. Boards may delegate some functions and responsibilities, but it's the board that remains ultimately accountable for all operations and actions within the school division. School boards have the legal authority, and they may delegate authority, but they cannot abdicate responsibility. You may remember that I said at the beginning that school boards exist at the will of the provincial government, so it's really a use it or lose it situation. As use the authority that has been given to you and use it well, or you could lose it. Authority is constrained, but school boards have some latitude. There are within the law both duties and powers. So the duties are really the must-dos that provide for appropriate education for all eligible. Powers are the may-dos, and that might be something like offering a kindergarten program. Under the PSA, or the Public Schools Act, it's not required, although all school divisions do offer it in some form. On the surface, the functions of the school board are very simple. It's a practice that it's in practice that they become more complex, and at times it's very tempting to veer off in another direction. This is when it becomes important to look back, and if you like, even refer to this webinar again as a refresher, and just say, okay, it's time to refocus and look at what are the primary functions of school boards. So these really include attend board and committee meetings of school board for any school board business, set local policy for the operation of schools, employ staff and set conditions of employment, establish annual divisional plans and goals, set divisional budget and determine required education property tax support, and hear appeals from students, parents, and staff. Now, a few things about the election of trustees themselves. School board elections are held every 4 years as outlined in the Municipal Councils and School Boards Elections Act. The ward system is simply a mechanism to facilitate the electoral process both for candidates and for voters. School trustees must remember that once elected, they must represent all schools, all communities, and all constituents within their division boundaries, and are not just there for their ward or even a particular school. They will be working toward what is best for the entire division. If a vacancy on a school board arises with more than a year left in the term, the 4-year term, a by-election is required. The qualifications to become a candidate are very simple. They include they must be a Canadian citizen, 18 years of age as of election day, and living in the school division or district at least 6 months as of election day. The candidates may not be MLAs, MPs, or members of the Senate, members of the council of a municipality or city, and pupils, or they cannot be pupils attending school regularly in the division or district in which they would be serving. One important thing to note is that candidates may be employees of the division or district in which they would serve if elected, but they must take an unpaid leave of absence from that division or district and from their employment there in order to serve. It would otherwise be considered a conflict of interest. Elections are held the fourth Wednesday of October on a 4-year cycle, and the nomination period begins 6 weeks before and closes 1 week prior to the election date. The eligibility requirements for a trustee candidate are outlined in the PSA, and you can find them under section 22(1), 2, 3. The trustee may run in any ward within a school division so long as he or she is resident within the boundaries of the division. And nominations must be supported by the lesser of 25 votes or 1% of the total number of voters in the ward in which the candidate plans to run. Or in the entire division, it's the same if it's not divided into wards. In the City of Winnipeg, nomination papers are filed with the city clerk's office, and in rural areas, the municipality or the school division handles it. In Manitoba, there are no legal requirements for trustee candidates with regard to campaign financing or reporting, and there are also no tax deductions for election expenses incurred by the candidate. I apologize for the small print here and and all these points, but I'll run through them quickly, and if you'd like to view them longer, you can just stop this as a recording and then discuss them and then continue on a little bit later. So, all right, a few things to note around a trustee's term in office. A trustee's seat will be declared vacant if he or she resigns or dies, ceases to be a resident of the division or district, fails to attend 3 consecutive regular board meetings without authorization by board resolution. A trustee will be disqualified from holding office if he or she violates any provision of the Public Schools Act, is convicted of an offense punishable by imprisonment of 5 years or more, or is convicted of an offense under certain sections of the Criminal Code. They might be breach of trust of a public office, selling or purchasing office equipment, or influencing or negotiating appointments or dealings within the office. So I find this last slide of interest and perhaps one of the most useful if you're thinking of running as a trustee. These are some of the myths that we have consistently heard from trustees who have served. So I'll just go through a few of those. It's only 2 board meetings a month. It's usually a lot more when you count into all of the other meetings you will be attending. I can be all things to all people in my school division, or I can fix things and make stuff happen, or the only qualification necessary for trusteeship is to get elected. And it's not about money, and it's not, and if it's not about money and it doesn't contravene the PSA, it's not a conflict of interest. So if we go through these a little bit, there's a lot more time devoted to meetings. If you think about committees you'll be serving on, planning, school functions, connecting with community and with legislators. There's also criticism, and you have to have a thick skin. You have no authority to really fix things, but you do have a voice at the table, and your constituents will be expecting you to use that voice at the table. Everyone will be asking and pulling you in many different directions, so you have to remember not to take the parochial perspective, but that you represent more than one school. Of note is the 4th point. Some take the notion that you don't need to learn anything anymore after you get elected, but the majority know that the learning never stops. It's quite the same as when you leave school. I don't think the learning ever stops after that either. And with regard to the last one, this is something that school boards have to develop a policy on before it becomes an issue. It can be about perception, and as a board you need to perhaps sometimes take the sniff test and really say if it smells wrong, then perhaps it very likely is wrong. A quick an example of that to demonstrate would be if you're a teacher in one division, or maybe even the spouse, you're a teacher and a spouse of someone in that division, or even a division in the next division. How do you as the trustee take care of your responsibilities when it comes to overseeing labor contracts? Even if it's not the teacher's contract, but maybe it's operational support staff. Let's look at it this way. If some of that budget doesn't go to those operational support staff, will it leave more money in the budget to go to the teachers? You can also look at something called pattern bargaining. If you get one group in a division, in the next door division, to agree to accept contract terms, perhaps it's more likely that the people in the next division are going to accept it as well. So there's all kinds of different scenarios when it comes to conflict of interest, probably as many as there are schools in Manitoba. But that's not to say, obviously, that trustees come in with the intention of crossing any lines, and most of them don't. It's just important thing. It is an important thing, though, to remember what your role is, and as a school board, to be prepared to deal with that. And sometimes it becomes a very tough thing to do that and actually addressing those conflicts. So you need to do that and make sure that your board does maintain its credibility. So we'll just come into the end here, and despite what may appear to be a lot of boundaries and hurdles, being a trustee can actually be very rewarding when working with and within the system. If you're a new trustee, I hope you experience many of those rewarding moments, and if you're thinking of running, I really hope you do. If you have any questions around what you've seen here or something that stems from this, please contact me or any of my colleagues at the Manitoba School Board Association, and we'll be happy to speak with you.